Now, we've already talked about value as subjective. That is to say, a value requires a valuer, a valuation, a judgment made by that valuer in order for a value to actually exist. And I'm not going to back off from that idea that a value requires a valuer. But what I do want to look at is the possibility that some values are objective in origin, and as such, force themselves on the human mind. Again, let's remind ourselves, something is subjective if it is dependent on the human mind for its existence, its truth value, its characterization, its intended, imagined, evaluated, constructed somehow by the mind. Without the mind, it wouldn't exist. Without the subject, it wouldn't exist. So all I want to say is that perhaps at least some values can be constructed as objective. What have I got in mind? Well, I'm going to go through our four categories that we just talked about, and I'm going to start with mathematical, the one I suggested would be the most trouble for subjective anyway. Work my way back through and try to illustrate that for at least some of these values, well, in fact, for all of these values, it is possible to characterize at least one or maybe more values as objective. That is to say, independent. And let's look at it this way. It's independent at least in the sense that the human mind cannot make it go away. If it were dependent, we could make it go away. The mind could intend something else, construct something else, evaluate in some other way. But these things, at least perhaps, can't be evaluated away. Okay, let's talk about it. First on our list was mathematical. I suggested that primarily counting, what was counted, how it was counted, that counting is essentially subjective, and I'll stand by that. But I'm going to suggest that while counting may be subjective, that amount is not. Well, look at it this way. We take a look at a range of hills, and we take a look at another range of hills. Now, how we count those hills, whether we group them up into 12 or 15 over there, when I look over here, I only see 3. I mean, I could try to group them up as 1 or break them down further, but anybody can see that there's fewer over here than there is over there. There's less mass over here than there is over there. Less going on over here than going on over there. You know, I bring my 12 sheep into the pen, you bring your 3, and you say, hey, next morning I'm going to take these many sheep out. And you're like, I'm not going to let you take that many sheep out. That's not how many sheep I had. I don't know how many I had because counting is not something I do all that well, but I know I had more than you. And that more than quality, at least, seems to force itself on the human mind. So there's at least one possible mathematical value that is describable as objective. So much for mathematical value, number value. Let's turn to truth value, alethic value. How independent of the mind can that be? Well, it's pretty obvious that most people will seem to think that truth is independent of human thought, but we've seen how maybe it isn't. Let's set that aside. Let's turn to how it could be clearly objective. And what I'm going to suggest here is that we take a look at logic. Now, I am an empiricist where logic is concerned. I take logic to be the description of how human thinking works. Now, since it's a description, how can it be independent of a describer? Well, what I'm going to suggest is how human, we said again, how human thinking works. Well, sometimes it works and it works well, and sometimes it works and it doesn't work well. Well, how can we tell when it doesn't work well? Well, by comparing it to the world. Thus, we are moving beyond human thought and out into the world. The easiest example to consider is the law of excluded middle. P or not P. We know it works because we can take a look at this, that, or the next thing in the world. This is poisonous or not poisonous. This is yours or not yours. This clear success in the world lets us know that this principle of human thought works, that it's successful. As I say, this comes back to the pragmatic theory of truth. The correspondence and coherence theories of truth really lean hard on reality, but any of them seem to imply that our only meaningful way of assessing success in our behavior and thought processes is by looking to an external, a non-mental, a non-subjective approach. Let's take a moment to consider a principle that has underlined both of our discussions before on mathematical value and alethic value, and will underpin our arguments going forward. This value is survival value. Survival value of necessity isn't subjective, at least not in its entirety. I mean, I can make a case for the other way, but let's stick with this idea right now. When we're talking survival, we're talking continued existence, not in our heads, but in the world. Now, idealists are going to say, well, it's all in your heads, so I don't even know what you're talking about. But let's set that aside for a minute. Let's simply concentrate on the idea that for surviving, we're talking about interacting with a reality beyond our immediate controllable reality, the one that we seem to be in charge of. Since we're not in control of it, it can't be dependent on our minds. It therefore is independent. And that's all we mean by objective, that which exists without the need to depend upon human thought. And survival seems to be a sure candidate for that condition. Okay, let's turn to moral theory. Can moral theory be objective? Well, there's a lot of people who seem to really want to hang on to moral theory as objective. I'm not quite sure why, to be honest with you. The subjective versions work fine. But if you're bound and determined to have an objective moral reality, let me suggest that we can get one just as easily as not by appealing to this idea, again, of survival. That those values, whether they're the rational construct of Immanuel Kant or the projection into the real world of utilitarianism, whether it's the natural law theory proposed by St. Thomas Aquinas, certainly Aristotle's golden mean, all of these look out into the world for justification and success in identifying whether or not this is a good or evil outcome. So, how can we decide whether it's good or evil? Does it keep us alive? Does it keep the species alive? Does it make our society alive? Do we continue to exist in the world? Again, our existence in the world can't be dependent on us. We have to depend on it. So here's a way in which we have moral justification, justification for morality that exists independent of the human mind. Aesthetic value is the one value that most people are prepared to say is purely subjective, that there is no objective version possible. There are some suggestions out there in the world that certain sorts of appearances of people, well, for example, the most clear example is that of infants and children. We notice that infants and children, whether they're infant animals or infant people, and children resemble the infants to an extent, we see them as cute insofar as they all have the big eyes and the little face and everything grouped down here. A collection of features that is universally identified, at least in the case of children, as desirable, as beautiful. Other studies, not so conclusive, but it's nevertheless true that we can suggest at least one principle of beauty that seems to stretch across all cultures without any need to appeal to a culture, but instead appealing to that survival value. I mean, kids are tough enough to put up with as it is, but if you can't even take the way they look, but everybody, when they see a baby, goes, oh, well, baby, whatever. We're all drawn to it. We all find it cute. We all find it, maybe in a small way, beautiful, but nevertheless beautiful. It's also true that in general we find things that are whole rather than partial, things that are symmetrical better than asymmetrical, and all of these kinds of claims, and because these aren't perfect, these later ones I'm mentioning, all appeal to the idea of health and therefore survival. Now we come to the value that, after perhaps aesthetic value, seems the most subjective, and that's economic value. But economic value is not entirely independent of that element of survival that we've been talking about. Sure, gold is arbitrarily valuable. Yes, particular properties are arbitrarily valuable. But food, shelter, clothing, the things we need to stay alive, these aren't mind dependent. Again, as we've already said, the mind is dependent on these things. As we've seen across the board, we're making an appeal to something beyond logic, something even beyond metaphysics. Or perhaps not beyond metaphysics, beneath metaphysics, physics. This is important. Philosophy is not an exercise in logic. It's not an exercise in problem solving. It's not something apart from everyday life. I define philosophy literally. Philosophy is the love of wisdom. Why do we do what we do? Well, we love it. If I love something, I want to know all about it. If I love someone, I want to know all about them. That love of wisdom, it's what drives the philosopher to engage in all these exercises of logic and definition. And yet, wisdom is not entirely logical processing. If it were, then computers would be wise, and they are not. No. What goes on in philosophy is how to lead a better life, a more meaningful life, a more complete life, Wisdom is tied to life. Wisdom is tied then to survival. And so when I appeal to this survival value for the sake of objectivity, I'm not abandoning philosophy, I'm embracing philosophy.